A diagram shown in Chad Daybell's trial at the very end of it was shocking. In one of my recent videos, I connected some dots and analyzed a suspicious text that convicted killer Chad Daybell wrote to his then wife Tammy. And this text was sent on the same day, on September 9th, that 16-year-old Tylee Ryan was buried in Chad's backyard. She was killed egregiously and then buried. But recently, during Chad Daybell's trial, a diagram of Tylee's remains was presented in court, and not until near the end of the 8-week trial. And this diagram revealed that a lot of her remains were missing, raising even more questions for me and you. I'm Linda with It's a Crime, so now let's get into it. In my last video called Chad Daybell's Tell-All Text to Tammy and the Missed Meaning, I broke down the text from Chad Daybell that revealed several unsettling details, including new information involving 4 specific words that suggest an even worse potential outcome for Tylee. Chad also mentioned shooting a raccoon, burying limb debris, and burying the raccoon in the fire pit and pet cemetery, ending it with fun times. I also highlighted information from the trial about Chad's brother-in-law, Alex Cox, who was implicated in these murders. Alex had reportedly said, "If I ever become a zombie, just shoot me in the face." And Tylee Ryan was deemed a zombie, and contrary to Chad's claim, there was no raccoon buried in the yard. It was Tylee. Chad's text about shooting a raccoon eerily parallels the horrific reality that Tylee was killed and she was also dismembered and burned. Part of her skull was among the missing evidence, making one ponder, was she shot like the raccoon, and was she shot in the face, as Alex hinted in his own words? But more on that in a moment. John Pryor, Chad Daybell's defense attorney, argued that there's no evidence to prove Chad was in the yard the day she was buried, yet Chad's own words placed him there, and the jury agreed, found him guilty, and sentenced him to death. Also, Alex Cox and Chad had a phone exchange that morning, and then shortly after, Alex showed up at his place, stayed there, and then left to Del Taco as he apparently worked up an appetite. That's when Chad sent the raccoon text to Tammy, and satellite imagery shows there was a change in the Daybell yard. And that text was not only his tell, but in my opinion, his celebration of his handiwork. For the past 4 years, I've believed that he takes enjoyment in these gruesome details, the words, the evidence, the duper delight. For more insights, check out my most recent video. I'll have that link below, and also I'll have a link to a playlist of other behavior type videos. And speaking of dupers, check out his new mugshot. This, my friends, is the real Chad Daybell. This is no surprise to me, but now he really doesn't have to pretend anymore, does he? Now, during his wicked ways, Chad Daybell had 9 burner phones and Alex Cox had 6 burner phones. And in trial, experts discussed the data points or pings of Alex in Chad's yard. Now, if you're John Pryor, you call them bings, not pings. And Lori Vallow Daybell, Chad's accomplice, had 6 burner phones. Even Tylee mentioned months before to Lori that she looked like a drug dealer with all her phones. There was also data indicating that Chad and Alex communicated that very morning of Tylee's burial and before Alex arrived. Now, I wonder what that conversation would be like. Perhaps talking about transporting Tylee, helping in dismemberment, zombie talk, coming up with the BS raccoon story. What did they say to each other? And during the trial, it was revealed that Chad deleted his location data for the entire year of 2019, the year Charles Vallow was murdered, Tylee Ryan, JJ Vallow, and Tammy Daybell, along with the attempt on Brandon Boudreau. And interestingly, Alex Cox, Lori and Chad's fall guy, wasn't informed about how to delete his location data, and eventually he felt and expressed that he believed that he was being set up. He died on December 12th, 2019, 3 months after the kids were buried, 2 months after Chad's first wife was murdered. And the day before he died, he told his newlywed wife, Zulema Pastenes, or as the defense attorney likes to call her, Zaluma, Alex said, "I think I'm being their fall guy. Now, with Chad knowing how to delete his location, and he did it for the entire year, do you think Chad may have been in Arizona during Charles Vallow's murder, but just knew how to not get caught? Do you think he might be heading to Arizona soon and will be charged? Let me know in the comments below. With Alex and Chad in the Daybell yard on September 9th, 2019, Chad's then wife Tammy is at work, as it was a Monday. Tylee is burned and buried, and her necklace and pendant were found by the fire pit. A Pura Vida necklace, literally meaning pure life. And in trial, it was revealed that Chad told his neighbor that Tylee didn't like Chad. And imagine being Tylee, and even at a 1% level, comparing Chad to Charles Vallow. There's no comparison. She knew, in my opinion, and I'm betting JJ picked up on who and what Chad Daybell was all about. And there are a few components of Tylee's death that are unknown. Her cause of death, where she was killed, and where the rest of her remains are. The known info, there were tool marks on her bones, and during a live stream that I did during trial, a viewer had talked about Dr. John Mathias from Hidden True Crime and how he connected the tool marks with SA. I did not see that, but was told in this live stream, which is very interesting to me because in the raccoon text video that I created, I broke down one section and had wondered the very thing about Tylee without knowing this important piece of information from Dr. John. So I'll have to invite him on the show to discuss this. What do you think? Let me know below. As for the burning, according to experts, they said it's possible that Tylee's remains could be burned within 2 hours. And in trial, they discussed something called a funeral pyre. Now, neighbors had reported a few bonfires at the Daybell residence from that day and into the following spring. So this funeral pyre, sometimes called open air cremations, are simply a pile of wood on the ground or on a stone base on which a body is placed on or under it and then set on fire. And although funeral pyres have a long history and are important in some cultures, they are rare and often illegal in most of the modern Western world. They can be part of a funeral rite or execution, and as I mentioned, it is a form of cremation, and the body is placed either on or under the pyre, which is then set on fire. And these funeral pyres can reach up to 800 degrees Celsius, which I need to do the thing in Fahrenheit. Somebody do that below. In researching, it typically takes around 5 hours for the body to become ashes, but as it stated in trial, it can take as little as 2 hours. On that day of Tylee, Alex was busy in the middle of the night, and the question arose as to when would there be time to dismember? And it takes a long time. And Alex was at Lori's from 2:42 a.m. on the 9th until 3:37, and then there's an hour unaccounted for. So did he drive and drop Tylee off? I believe it would be Chad who would have done the dismemberment, in my opinion, not Alex. And Chad and Alex would have exchanges later that morning, still early morning, according to digital data. And then Alex arrives on Chad's property at 9:21 a.m., according to that data. He stays for 2 hours and 18 minutes. Then he heads to Del Taco, stays there for 10 minutes, and then heads to his apartment and stays there for the rest of the day. Now back to this funeral pyre. Currently in the U.S., there is only one location in Colorado where this is legal, and you have to be a resident of the county. You can opt for an open air cremation if a person wanted to. And side note, it's interesting because the location is actually near where Suzanne Morphew was found in a different case. It's only an 18-minute drive east. I couldn't help but think of her when I read about it. I'll have her case in the description box below as well. This practice is often associated with religious or cultural rituals, serving as a symbolic farewell to the departed and a means of releasing their spirit from the physical body, which is interesting, seeing as how Chad and Lori believed in zombies and that their victims were inhabited by them. Now, I wonder what extent Chad knew about this particular process, seeing as he was a cemetery sexton and seemed to have a fascination with death right from when he was a little boy. I outlined that in one of my previous videos. But at the very end of trial is where we really saw things connect with Tylee. It was the defense attorney, John Pryor, who presented the diagram to the court. And that was when you thought it couldn't get any more disturbing. It did. And there were parts in trial that were very, very, very hard to listen to. And kudos to the jurors because they had to actually look at the evidence.
What did you discover in regards to the inventory of the remains?
We found that there were certain areas of Tylee Ryan's remains that were absent, and this included large parts of the vertebral column, most of the left and right arms, and large portions of the legs, kind of from mid-thigh down towards the ankle on at least one of the legs.
And Judge, could I utilize the Elmo device at this point?
Yes.
So I'm showing you a illustration from your report, and there is a laser pointer up there somewhere, if you can find it. And then off to your left is a large screen. And if you could just go through in general, the areas that you found were not present at the burial site of Tylee Ryan, and just basically describe each one for me, if you would.
Yeah, so the way that this skeletal diagram is labeled is on the left side is a front view of the skeleton, and on the right side is a back view. Anything that's colored in black was absent, which means we could not identify those portions of the body in the inventory. So we were missing a little bit of the skull from the left eye socket, a little bit here from the back of the skull. And then if we move down towards the limbs, we're missing almost all of the right arm, except for just the shoulder and a small piece of this forearm bone right here. We're missing almost the entire left arm, except for the shoulder. We are missing most of the ribs, but we were not able to label those individually because we could not determine which rib was which because they were burned and fragmented.
Okay, I'd have you stop there for just a moment, and please forgive my interruption, but when you say fragments of the ribs, is it your testimony that the majority of the rib cage was missing?
I wouldn't say the majority, but a large portion of the ribs were not represented in the inventory.
Okay, so I think we were at the last we let off. We talked about. I think my comment was the majority of the rib cage, but you said instead it was a large portion of them.
That is correct.
Okay, and then can you continue with your pointing out the different remains that you were unable to locate?
Yes. So as we move down, we can see that from about the mid-thigh area, these are the femur bones, all the way down to just a little bit of the top of the shin bone here, the tibia bone. No bones could be found from those areas. And we had a little bit of the right leg here, missing this section down here. And then on the left leg, we have almost nothing represented from that leg, except for a few small fragments. So we're missing fairly large portions of the skeleton.
You're missing large portions of the skeleton.
That is correct.
Now, you are an expert in the area of forensic anthropology, and you mentioned that you are involved in the recovery as it relates to wildfire victims in California as well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that you have, and I don't know how to talk to you about this, but the part of your job is scientific testing of remains and the impact that they can have with fire. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you conduct experiments in that regard, right?
We have done some training exercises, and colleagues of mine have as well, where we have experimentally burned a willed body donor.
Okay, and I'm going to stop you there. What that is in a situation where someone has identified on their donor card that they would be willing to be part of a testing, scientific testing, and that's how you obtain the body to engage in your testing. Is that correct?
That is correct, and these are for training exercises for law enforcement and for search and rescue personnel.
And explain to me the process of what you did to run these tests of the will donor body.
So these tests typically involve kind of building what sort of looks like a funeral pyre out of pallets.
Okay, and when you say a funeral pyre, are we talking about a small brush fire?
It's usually multiple pallets, probably around 4 or 5.
4 or 5 pallets.
Yeah, to create enough fuel to burn the body.
So this is a large fire.
Correct.
Would the expression a bonfire be appropriate?
Yes, it would be, similar in size to a large bonfire.
Parts that were missing were most of Tylee's limbs, part of her skull, and most of her ribs. And if we go back to Chad's text that he sent that morning, he said he felt he had to burn all the limb debris. Now, interestingly, those are parts that are mostly missing. Now, in trial, Chad wanted the info just so, and I did a video on it. He shook his head no where some of Tylee's remains were or are, and he was very animated the day of closing arguments. I outlined his behavior, as I said in a recent video. I'll put that also below. So the question is, where are they? And in trial, Garth Daybell, Chad's eldest son, gave testimony and talked about the raccoon and where they buried them. Earlier in the summer, they had an issue in 2019 with a raccoon, it was said, and asked a neighbor for cages for that. And by the way, hi, Matt and Regan Price. Now, when asked about the raccoon, Garth said that when he arrived home on September 9th, Chad was wearing yard work clothes, and Garth stated he sounded very excited when he told him he had shot a raccoon and buried it. And Garth said he believed it was the same raccoon they were trying to catch that kept breaking out of this cage. And when he was asked about the raccoon buried in the pet cemetery, Garth responded with, no, they were all buried behind the silver shed. He said that Chad had shown him that he buried it behind that silver shed, but according to Garth, said he wasn't there during the burial, only that Chad had shown him, and that all pets were buried in the pet cemetery, and only pets, not a raccoon, that was buried behind the shed. If you have more information on that, can you let me know below? I'd be very, very appreciative. And side note on Emma and Garth, Chad's children, they were lying like crazy on the witness stand under oath, and especially Emma, who seemed to be very, very coached. Now, notable, Chad would be in those work clothes, as Garth stated. He had quite the morning, didn't he? And then Alex leaves, and Chad sends the text and tells Tammy that he's going to write at BYU for a little while, which he has said before, and that's typically when he met up with Lori. And I always had the creepy thought that Chad looks out his window after all this and smiles at his handiwork. In my opinion, it's disturbing. Tylee's charred remains were reduced to mostly in a bucket. And we don't know how she died, but we do know it was beyond senseless and part of this secret society's wicked, wicked plans. A few things I want to point out is a line in Chad's raccoon text and a similar line he gives about the neighbor's goat. Both had to do with the fence. With Tylee, Chad stated he saw the raccoon along the fence, hurried and got his gun, and it was still walking along. The other one is about Chad's neighbor. He tells his then friend Julie Rowe, who was on Nancy Grace years ago, reportedly said, oh, and we had a neighbor's goat get caught in the fence. I had to shoot it and kill it and bury that too. Now, notable in my video about 10 creepy things about Chad Daybell, I talked about his neighbor Eldon, who suddenly died and used to walk along Chad's property by the fence. And he died less than a week after JJ was buried. He also sold insurance, notably Primerica, the same insurance of Tammy's and the insurance that Chad got charged for and ripped off. Is really illuminating, isn't it? Is that where Tylee's other remains are, by the fence? And the silver shed is just too easy of a spot? Where did they completely search? I was of the understanding it was only near the pet cemetery and then over near that tree. But I'm sure they searched the property. I know there were cadaver dogs, but it's curious. Where are they? And one more thing, As I stared at the diagram, I thought, her skull is missing, and her limbs and big bones, the biggest ones in the body. And then I thought, skull and bones. What else don't we know about? Watch Chad's reaction here and watch the extra breakdown I do on the text right here. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.